Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Umlink Energy Speaks Back, powered by Esther Energy. My name's Paul Webb. I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and I'm your host. Weekly, in partnership with the Energy Conscious team, we are going to be bringing you knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. Umlink.com are the proud sponsors of EnCO, and the strategy that we're developing now aims to engage, equip, empower organisations and energy professionals to enable significant energy savings through people. The EnCO initiative integrates employee engagement with technical opportunities to reduce energy consumption, costs, and carbon emissions to accelerate the journey to net zero emissions. This has all been brought together by Esther Energy and the Energy Institute. So Umlink is dedicating its spotlight to share the EnCO story to the world. This is episode 75 of Umlink Energy Speaks Back, powered by Esther Energy. And my special guest today is an EnCO practitioner who is one of the lead trainers of the training. So without any further ado, I give you John Mulholland. Good afternoon, John. How are you today?
Oh, good afternoon, Paul. I'm very well. Looking forward to this session, and it's good to see you again.
Brilliant. And yourself, John. We have been involved in your training that you've been putting together regarding EnCO. And sort of inspiring the industry with the works you've been doing. So I've learned a lot about you over the last 12 months, John, and I'd really like to share that now with our audience. So if you can give us some background to yourself, where you've come from, and what you're doing today.
Great. Well, thanks, Paul. My background is that I went to study chemical engineering and fuel technology at university back in 1971, which is over 50 years ago now. Yeah. And I graduated in 1974. And my reason for doing chemical engineering was because I wanted to do something for the environment, even way back then. And that was stimulated by two things. One was the photos of the Earth from the moon in the first moonshots, where you could just see the Earth for the first time photographed from outer space. And I thought, gosh, we've only got one of those. We need to look after it. And the other was that I used to go to a lot of rock festivals in the late 60s, early 70s. And I was at the Isle of Wight in 1970. And I remember talking to some hippies about sustainability. That was the first conversation I had. And actually, I think it was both those two items that made me think, I want to do something for the environment. And that's why I studied chemical engineering. And then after graduation, I went to work for British Steel Corporation Chemicals, and they had 12 sites throughout the UK. And their big priority in 1974 in the first oil crisis was to save energy. So the chief engineer called about 20 professional engineers into the office and said, gentlemen, we're going to have to save energy and we need to do it fast. So for the first 3 years of my career, I went tearing around sites, identifying opportunities with other guys. And then I think we had one woman engineer then. So there weren't many around in those days. But then we basically got the money, project managed the installation of whatever it was, variable speed drives or better insulation or high efficiency motors, whatever it was. And did that for a while. Then I went to work for Foster Wheeler Energy in Reading, and they were a petrochemical contractor building huge infrastructure projects, whole refineries, big chemical plants all over the world. So I did that and worked on that for a while. Eventually, I became a freelance chemical engineer, mainly doing safety studies, but I found that a bit boring, to be honest. Has op and has an, it's to stop bad things happening on chemical plants. And then I think the big step came in 1988 when I joined NIFE's consulting group, and NIFE's stood for National Industrial Fuel Efficiency Service. And they were easily the largest energy consultants in the country at the time. And the boss said to me, John, we've got lots of technical people. I want you to set up a training and behavior division. This is in 1988, because what we realize is that senior management need to be far more engaged in energy management. And we don't want our reports to gather dust on shelves. We want to actually see things happening. And you're the person who's going to do that. So I started from scratch. He gave me a year. He said, if you're not successful after a year, I'm going to sack you. So that was quite an added motivation.
So the pressure was on then.
Yeah, it was. He said, you've got to make, you need to make a decent profit because I'm paying you such a high salary. That's what he thought. But anyway, to be fair, I had some really lucky breaks in my first year, which I'll not bore you with. But but then what happened was there's a slight interruption to normal service when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. And I was catapulted into Eastern Europe for 10 years, traveling all around Eastern Europe, mainly doing, behavior change and training and recruiting more and more people. And I had a team of about 12 in the end. And they were all qualified energy consultants, but were trained up to do employee engagement, engage at board level, train staff technically. And then I was with NICE for 24 years and became a director there. And then I left in 10 years ago, almost precisely 10 years ago now. And I set up my own business, Mulholland Energy.
Yep.
So, and what I do now is basically behavior change, ISO 50001, ESOS, SECR, and, other general energy stuff. But EnCO, which is the little logo behind you there, is something I've really picked up in the last 4 years. And I'm very, very motivated about it.
John, we can't go too far into this podcast without just asking about the conversation with the hippies. You said you had a conversation with them.
Yes.
What was they talking about in the 70s?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it was the Isle of Wight Rock Festival. I went with my French girlfriend at the time, and we didn't have a tent and didn't even have sleeping bags. So what we would do is we'd sit in the main arena at night around a fire because, that's where you could keep warm because it was pretty cold, even though it was August. And each night we had some amazing conversations with these hippies about sustainability. I mean, plastic was just coming out in those days, and also about pollution generally, and discussions on things like nuclear energy. And one of the comments that the one hippie made that always stuck in my mind was, we only have one. We only have one shot at this. I think essentially what he was saying. But we've only got one planet. So it's like the Marks and Spencer's thing, there's no plan B, there's no planet B. This is all we've got. So we better actually treat it well. And they talked also about the concept of stewardship, the idea that we're given the earth in our generation, and our job is to pass it on in a better shape to the next. Well, I have to say, looking back 50 years, we haven't done that.
No, we haven't.
We've lost 1 million species in 50 years. And we have got climate change in a runaway situation. So actually, those hippies were actually very prophetic, I think. But they did actually shape the direction I went in. I mean, I wasn't a hippie myself.
No.
But the idea of sustainability was something not even really thought about back in 1970. But there was a sort of gradual environmental movement kicking off. And that's grown a lot, obviously, in the last 50 years.
You got any thoughts of why we haven't really taken any bigger steps since 1970 to where we are today. Because I'm on the same position as yourself. So, you know, my background's I started in the 1980s
Yeah,
regarding nuclear power, and then I got out of nuclear power and then into energy management from there. But I think in the 80s, early 80s, we were just playing with it. I was just putting building management systems in because it was easier for us to control systems, you know. But
yeah.
why haven't we? Why is it taking so long since the 70s if we was talking about it then?
Well, I think we have made progress. Um, so I wouldn't say that we've not made progress, because it could be a lot worse than what it is now if we hadn't intervened in the various things that have happened. But I think that we've got to work faster, you know, that we've got all the solutions we need to solve the climate crisis and most of the technologies we've got. And really, it's now just a question of political will. And I often think that the climate crisis is actually more of a leadership crisis. You know, that we actually need people who will lead us through this change. And I'm currently involved with an American leadership company to develop to try and utilize some of the general leadership skills that are used in the boardrooms in the States and to bring them to this country, but to put on it a much more environmental and sustainable thing. So if we take net zero, for instance, the biggest barrier, I think, to getting to net zero is leadership. Leadership at the political level and leadership at an organizational level, especially of the organizations that emit a lot of carbon.
When you look at the leadership and what is their direction? Can you sort of advise them where they need to be looking from leaders' point of view? Is it, you know, you picked on earlier the EnCO process and the practitioners there, which I really think's a brilliant way forward. Are we looking at the balance between technology and people, or is it more people that needs to make these changes?
Well, I often, when I'm talking about reducing energy, I often use this, you know, three circle image, and in each circle you've got technical in one circle, you've got people in the other, but then you've got data in the other. And I think data is very important, and we emphasize this a lot in EnCO. And EnCO, by the way, for people who don't know, it means energy conscious organization. So what we're trying to create are energy conscious organizations. And as you know, Paul, yourself, that data is like the lifeblood of getting anything done, because if you don't have the data, how do you know you're doing anything useful? So data is absolutely vital, but the people side of it can be very broad. It's not just about people switching stuff off, though it does include that, but it's about leadership in organizations, setting the tone, setting the vision. Now, there's a great book called Leadership is an Art by a guy called Max Dupre, who unfortunately is now passed on. But it's a very influential book. And one of the comments he made about leadership, he said, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The second is to serve the team. And the third is to say thank you. Now, I love that quote, because when he says the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality, what that means is that all leaders across the world need to wake up to the climate change crisis we've got. And clearly, some organizations are, and they're very good at it, but there's a lot that aren't. And the reason I like this word reality is to sort of identify the reality, but what's implied in that is also a vision, because a leader has a vision of the future and he wants to bring people with him. But the leader also recognizes that he or she does not have the skills to do that on their own. They need a team of really able, gifted people to bring the organization in that direction. And that's why the leader's role is to serve the team. And I think one of the biggest problems we've got in society is that leadership is seen as some sort of autocratic tin pot dictator who basically wants to get his or her way in an organization. Well, it's not. The real leadership is actually about serving people to enable them to make their contribution. And that's why I think leadership needs to be turned upside down. And, this is the same in politics as well. I think one of my concerns about leadership in politics is the short-termism of the electorate system that we've got, where, you have a general election every 5 years, and the policies set tend to be short-term with a view to getting voters to vote for them at the next election. And that doesn't sit well with long-term environmental goals that require really difficult decisions. So I have been in the past known to ask a very controversial question. I'm not sure if I should ask it. Okay, I will.
You're going to get political on me now, aren't you?
Okay, here's a question, and I don't really have the answer, but is democracy the best vehicle for delivering sustainability? Now, immediately people say, well, what's the alternative? Do you want a totalitarian state? And clearly not. But on the other hand, by asking the question, it makes you realize that things have to change in politics. I'm of a view, actually, that the way politics and policies in countries are going to change on the environment is actually going to be bottom up and not top down. In other words, politicians will finally get into a position where if 25% of the population is really angry about the environment and about the direction of policies in a nation, those 25% will then can influence the rest of the nation into electing a government that will make the difficult decisions.
Yeah. And didn't we see that in America with the Trump situation, where he went totally against all the environment generation, didn't he? And now he's not in there, and it's all going back the other way. He changed lots of things that Obama put in place, and then he changed, and then it's all going back. And that's exactly what you said, the short-term strategies that they have, or the policies that they implement with the long-term terms.
I think you're right. I mean, one person can make quite a difference in terms of direction of the country. I mean, my biggest regret in American politics was that Al Gore didn't become president of the United States back in whenever it was 2000, when he got beaten by George Bush, because clearly Al Gore had been doing his inconvenient truth and trekking the world and banging on that drum. He was one of the early pioneers of the whole sustainability, and climate. He was going on about climate change. I've still got his video on my bookshelf here, but that didn't happen. But I think we've got to get to a position where no one can get elected unless they're serious about the environment, and that's really up to the electorate. So I'm not pessimistic, because I think that there is a groundswell happening right now that's taking us in the right direction.
Yeah, we're seeing that from all these protests that are going on and through the COP.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a good example of it, and we're seeing it every day now. We've seen it on Sky News. They have dedicated programs. The BBC are doing things around it. And we're seeing it day to day, and we're even having adverts. Like the likes of Lidl's are boasting that they're now becoming more and more sustainable. And where before it used to be just the big players like Marks and Spencer's, as you mentioned before, with their Plan B. So, John, I try not to be too political within my podcast.
I understand that.
Let's talk about EnCO and where that's come from, and what we're hoping to achieve with that.
Right. Well, EnCO had its roots a few years ago when we tried to do a joint initiative somewhere else, which didn't really work very well. And that was actually trying to get the psychology profession involved in behavior change on sustainability. I won't go into the reasons why it didn't really work out, but I by the way, I am strongly of the view that psychologists have got a very key role, because they are all into behavior change, but very few of them are involved in behavior change in relation to climate change. If we're going to change climate, we've got to change behavior.
Exactly.
So that's in the back burner a bit, excuse the pun. No carbon back burner, I should think. But the EnCO then, what happened then was that a few of us then went to the ESTA, the Energy Systems Technical Association, and through them and with support from the Energy Institute in the UK, we formed EnCO, as I mentioned, energy conscious organisation. And the vision of that is essentially twofold. One is to try and get larger organizations who use a lot of energy to reduce their energy by engaging their employees. And the reason that we want to do that is that if you're on a journey of net zero, the very first thing you should do is reduce demand. And the fastest way to reduce demand is to engage your employees, because the cost of doing so is either nothing or it's very low. And what that can do is get you off onto a great start for net zero. And the reason we need to do that is that the UN say that in this decade, we have to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, 50%, in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C. So that means, okay, you're just embarking on a net zero project, great, and you might have to do it by 2030 or 2040 or whatever. What is the very first thing you're going to do? Well, the logical thing to do is to reduce consumption. And the fastest and the cheapest way of doing that is to address your people. That's what EnCO is all about. So it's getting large organizations to do that. But the second strand in it is that what we noticed is that a lot of energy professionals throughout the world have a very technical background, like me or like you, that, you may have done a degree in engineering or science or something. But the behavioral things, well, that's the psychologists, it's the social scientists, that's what they do, But given that it doesn't take a lot to help clients to do that, we thought we would equip energy professionals in this area so they are far more equipped and confident to be able to advise their clients on how they could reduce energy through their people. So those are the two main things: getting large organizations and equipping energy professionals. That's essentially what EnCO is about.
It's surprising you say so I worked for an organization in 2005, and they wouldn't do the spend to save scenario. And I had no choice. I had to go down the people's route, and I called it best practice. So I was going around all this. It was a group, and I was going around finding what one property was doing instead of another. I looked at all their buildings to find out who was using the less amount of energy based on their square footage. And then I thought, well, I'm going to look at them and focus on what they're doing that other groups aren't doing. And then I tried to take that knowledge into the other site. So what we found, we was actually making and securing savings of between 5 and 7% year on year, because the organization wasn't prepared to go and spend money on the likes of LEDs in them days. So we did actually achieve it, but we didn't call it energy consciousness. We called it best practice, which is what I call it and have called it in the past.
Yeah, great.
So it's amazing how, so originally I'm there trying to adjust the BMS. My background's BMS. So obviously we couldn't get no more from the BMS. So we had to focus on the people. We had to get them to turn areas off and shut things down. It was the only thing we could do. So it's interesting to see, and I'm sure if you was to speak to energy experts now, they would always say, oh yeah, we do that anyway. But to be able to sort of put it on its head now and say, we need to do that first, I think that's key going forward. Really do.
I think you're right.
You mentioned in your training, there's a ratio of how much savings can be achieved through that compared to doing technology savings.
Yes, we do. In the EnCO video, which you can see on the EnCO website, there's a link to it there. There is a graph where we say that basically most organizations waste about 50% of their energy use. And 25% could be saved by technical investment, spend to save, as you say. But the other 25% could be saved by people. Now, when we talk about people, we mean in the broader sense of the word. That means going from the cleaner and the janitor at the top of the organization right down to the bottom of the organization, the chief executive. The reason I've turned it on its head is this idea of serving.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've seen plenty of I mean, I've worked at this, Paul, for 30 years. When I started off, I had a blank sheet of paper and I thought, what on earth am I doing here? You know, I had no idea what I was doing and had to go, you know, quite a long learning curve, often making mistakes. But anyway, after a while, began to realize there's certain principles here, and I read widely, and I applied behavioral techniques into the energy field. And all these come out in the EnCO training courses, with which I do with Jez Rutter, who is my co-presenter. And the other, so this idea of saving 25% through people, it might not be true in every organization, but it's certainly true in a lot. And if you go on the EnCO website, there are 14 case studies on there. And one of them is a case study I wrote about, I was doing an ESOS audit, went to a furniture factory, looked at the half-hour electrical data and thought to myself, there's so much waste going on here, especially in the quiet periods. And I said, if you know, get your act together and switch everything off when you don't need it at night, you will save a lot of electricity. And that is exactly what they did. And we measured it before and after, and the savings was 25.6%.
Wow.
And what did it cost them? Nothing. How long did it take them? About 3 weeks to set something up. And all they did was allocate responsibilities and said, from now on, we're going to have a change in the way we do things. What I want you to do is this, 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 and this. They got themselves organized, and then they saved 25% of their electricity. Well, that company on its way to net zero, that means they've saved 25% in 3 weeks. You don't need 10 years or 50 years to achieve that. You can do that now. You know, and the thing is, Paul, time isn't on our hands. If we're going to reduce energy consumption by 50% in the next 8 years, which the UN is saying we have to, then people solutions is absolutely imperative. It's not nice to have. You know, you're never going to save 50% in 10 years unless you engage your people. And that's why EnCO, I think, is a world-changing concept and idea, and why we would like to really see it take off in a very big way.
Yeah, totally agree. So how does one energy expert, go from being an energy expert to an EnCO practitioner, this is the logo here?
Yeah. Well, you drive a car, do you, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so do I. And when we set off, we took driving lessons, presumably, and then we had a driving test. Yeah. But the only way you get through your driving test is that you learn how to drive. And so the only way of learning is actually by doing it. And so what we encourage in EnCO is a two-stage approach. The first is to get the theoretical knowledge and becoming what's called a registered EnCO consultant. And at the end of the training, you take an exam, and then if you pass that, you become that you get that registration, which is an approved qualification, and recognized by the Energy Institute and ASTA. And you yourself use it on your logos, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
Because you've been through the training yourself.
Yeah.
But then the next stage up is to become an approved EnCO practitioner. And to become one of those, you have to have done at least one major behavioral change project and written a case study and have the data to prove it worked. So we don't have many at the moment. We've got a few, but we'd like to see more, and there are more in the pipeline. But what that does is we're encouraging those people who've been through the theoretical training to then apply it with a client in a real situation and then come back and say, look, I've done it. And more people are doing that now because we've been running this for 2 years, or the training for 2 years. So that's the idea, to you learn by doing. And actually, to be honest with you, I mean, I've been doing this 30 years and I'm still learning. So, once you stop learning, you stop living. And so the idea is to try and keep on, adapting, changing things. The world changes as we go along. And so it's a never ending learning curve. Yeah.
It's lifelong learning.
Yeah.
I've been in the industry 42 years and I'm constantly learning.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I went on your training course. That was part of the learning, to learn. I think I can do my best practice and my training myself. But sorry, my camera's in the background.
That's all right. I can't hear anything. Just carry on.
I can. So I've used that myself regarding the best practice and learning, but I wanted to learn more about how I did it properly and using all the tools that you could set out to help me do that. And there's a lot of tools that gets provided as part of that training. What's the process? So people like energy experts can come to you and go on to the training. How long is the training for?
Well, we have 4 sessions. Each of them is 2 hours long. But before you start the training, and then between the sessions, you have to do certain amounts of assignments, reading, homework, and then we discuss some of that sort of preparation work during the actual workshops. So there's 4 workshops, and they're spread about 2 to 3 weeks apart.
Right.
So it's not all at once, so that people are busy, and we want them to be able to slot it into the normal, work schedule. But we've had some great training, and the way to find out about it. In fact, we've got a training course starting this week. So which is, I think, Friday. Friday. There's a course beginning. So if you're interested, go onto the EnCO website. It's got all the training dates on there, and it is good. It's definitely good training. And even though Jez and I are the facilitators of the training, we ourselves learn things from what people share. And one of the great things we do is to get people who are on the course to share their experiences. They're either the problems or the challenges they face, or even the successes. And some of those have actually presented whole case studies. And that's one of the reasons why we've got some great case studies on the website. So if people are a bit skeptical, does behavior change really work? Is it not just a flash in the pan? These sort of questions, which are really good questions. Then hopefully reading some of the case studies will make you realize, there's a lot of people getting on and doing this right now.
And those case studies are big names as well, aren't they? We see so once we've done the training, and we all meet up on a regular basis on doing the academies, and that's where you get people coming back to present their case studies. And we had James Britton's case study on Heathrow Airport, which was absolutely amazing, going through that journey he took.
It's been great, and we've got big names in there. People like Thorn Lighting and Rolls-Royce. I mean, these are not insignificant businesses. And but on the other hand, we've got some smaller organisations, like even schools. We had a school become an EnCO. So I think, these principles apply irrespective of the organisational size. And one of the other things that I'm very motivated about, from a behavioural point of view, is the application of ISO 50001. And we do stress that quite a lot on the course, because 50001 is the international, globally accepted energy management system standard. And there are countries all over the world that have got this. And I've worked with some large companies putting it in. But the reason I'm keen on 50001, it's got a really good behavioural element to it in terms of competence of key people, awareness of the workforce, communication, internal, external, and the whole standard is actually to do with people. Once you read it, I mean, it is technical, but there's a very big people element in it. So if you're interested in trying to get a lever for behavior change in your organization, ISO 50001, the application of the standard, and get certification, or even if you don't get certification and you just do the principles in the standard, you're still going to save a lot of energy, and you're going to be saving quite a lot of energy through people if you apply the standard.
EnCO for me is a stepping stone into ISO 50001. I really see that, because there's a lot of commitment there for ISO 50001 for organizations, but if they take a step back and look at the EnCO process, then as I say, it takes you and it eases you into the rhythm. I think ISO 50001 for me is a rhythm regarding your audits, your meetings, and starting that rhythm of the energy management system. And I can see, we spoke about this before, where ISO 50001 really hasn't got a grasp of organizations. They haven't really taken that forward, where, the EnCO thing could be that stepping stone to get them into it long term.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. It could well be. I mean, one of the things I do notice when I do quite regularly do gap analysis for 50001, and one of the interesting things I observe is that one of the big gaps, or the weaknesses, if you like, for a lot of organizations is on this whole thing to do with competency, skills, awareness, training, not just in ISO 50001, which you wouldn't expect them to have if they don't have the standard, but just generally in energy management generally. It's usually a weakness, but when they do 50001, that weakness then becomes a strength.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, it's a good sort of Trojan horse, or a lever for change, if you like. And no, I think it's a good point you make though about EnCO. I mean, tell me what things have you learned about behavior, Paul? I mean, I've talked quite a lot, but I know you've got bags of experience in this field.
I think for me, that's the first starting point of energy management, is to focus on behavior. Don't look at, I always say to my organizations that I work with, is energy management is a journey. The amount of times I start the meeting and they say, right, when are we going to put the solar on the roof? When are we going to do this? Change all our lights. I said, whoa, hold on a minute. Have you looked at your half-hourly data? Have you looked at your reports regarding, how you're using your energy? No, we just need solar on the roof. So I have to take it right back, sort of say, energy management's a journey. We need to take baby steps. And I show them the baby steps. And the first part is, building a relationship with the consultant and the organization, the like and trust. Then we look at the data, and then we look at see how we're using exactly you had with the furniture company. They probably never ever see their half-hourly data before in that format.
Yeah,
when I showed an organization only last week their half-hourly data, and I said, well, first question before I even put it up on the screen is, do you work Saturday and Sunday? No, we don't work Saturday, Sunday. In fact, we don't work Friday. I said, oh, that's interesting. Boom, here's your profile.
Were they surprised?
He placed an order on me to come and start working with him straight away.
Oh, well, that's a good result.
Yeah, so, I shortened the story a little bit there, but basically that was it. I asked the question.
What was the cause of the waste? Why?
Basically, they'd gone into COVID. They hadn't shut their building down. They had a BMS system that had been set up many years ago from day one.
Yeah.
And I find this all the time, where a system gets designed against the specification. The organization then moves into that building and no one looks at the spec or how they're using that building. It's just realignment. So my focus on energy management is the 4 principles: review, realign, reduce, and report. I take organizations through those simple steps.
Yeah.
And, the realigning is where we start making the savings. And that is 100% behavior patterns and what you're doing there.
Right. That's really interesting. So those 4 steps again, I thought they were very good. Just do you want to say them again?
Review, realign, reduce, and report.
That's brilliant. I like that. That's great.
Thank you for that.
I think also the point you made, which is a really important one about the BMS, is a perfect example of behavior change and people engagement. Because, when people think about behavior change, they often think just about the end user switching things off. But the people who control buildings, especially highly serviced buildings, are often the BMS operators, or and again, further back, the people who've designed them. And if the BMS isn't being properly set up and controlled, as you say, it can waste an awful lot of energy, And I've worked recently in buildings where, in retail, for instance, where the staff who work in there have got virtually zero control over energy use because it's all centrally controlled. But if the people centrally controlling it are not doing it correctly, it's going to waste loads of energy.
Exactly.
But the good news is the solution is quite simple, that you only have to focus on a few people.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the point you made there about BMS is very pertinent to behavior change.
Totally. It doesn't matter. The technology doesn't matter because it still has to be managed by somebody, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's the interface between technology and people. That interface is so important.
And you have to review things. This is why I go through the 4 principles. And you should be reviewing it at least annually what the BMS is doing. So you do a review annually and you realign annually or 6 monthly.
Yeah.
Or as and when there's a change has happened.
Yeah.
So John, I'm conscious about you. You're very clever. You're interviewing me now. I'm very impressed with that.
Well, I think that you've got so much to share that I'm always intrigued by, what people have learned, because we're all on a journey together, aren't we?
Exactly. So, John, it's come at this time where I'm going to put you on the spot. I know I've been putting you on the spot already all the way through this, but I'm going to put you on the spot now, John. So I'm going to ask you a question regarding what can you give back to our industry today as a takeaway for our energy experts?
Well, I'll be honest, I think I've already answered that question because the thing I'm giving back, I think, if you think about legacy, is EnCO, because we've been working on this, Jez and I and others. There's a whole team of people on it, where we've given our own time. It's not paid. We're doing this in a totally voluntary capacity. There is a kind of a very small payment, but it nowhere near covers the sort of fees that we need to run a business. So really, I think for the last 2 or 3 years, I've probably given about 20 to 25% of my time to EnCO free of charge. And the reason I'm doing it is because I actually believe in it. I mean, if I'd wanted to make more money, I'd have done something else. And I actually, to be honest with you, I have turned down quite a lot of work in order to do EnCO, to make sure that I'm free to do it. So I'd like to think that my legacy and my takeaway, or passing on the baton to future generations, is that EnCO really took off in a significant way, and that we were just the catalyst to get something much bigger movement moving. So we haven't seen that, massive expansion yet, but we hope it will. And, with people like yourself helping to promote it and coming on the course yourself and practicing it yourself, I kind of feel that would be the best legacy that I could leave behind.
Yeah. And how does that make you feel, John?
It makes me feel good. I mean, I'm involved with other things in a voluntary capacity, like setting up micro businesses in different countries across the world, and I give my time and sometimes my money, as an investment into these businesses to give people a chance. I think you and we've had lots of chances given to us in life, and everyone deserves a leg up, or an enabling hand to help them succeed. And I can think back in my own life of people who've done that with me, and that's essentially what I want to do for them. At the end of a life, it's not just a question of asking the question, what do you want to be thankful for, but what do you want to be thanked for is an important question, so that I think that's a really important question. What do you want to be thanked for? And that and sometimes that's something not to do with, people aren't interested in how much money you make. They want to know whether you care, whether you've contributed, whether you've enabled people to achieve their goals and fulfill their potential. And that brings us back to serving, that true leaders are leaders who serve and enable other people. I think that's what I'd like to be remembered for.
Yeah. And do you know from the word serve, you get to deserve. So then you deserve that afterwards, the thanks.
Yeah. Well, I think, though, in that quote I said, it was the leader saying to the team, thanks to the team, because, that's what you meant, wasn't it? Yeah. So this idea that, the leader isn't taking the glory, saying, look what I've done. He's saying to the team, look what you've done. Brilliant. And that requires humility. And I think it's in short supply.
Well, John, it's really great catching up with you. And I'd like to say, thank you for introducing me to EnCO and energy consciousness and the work you're putting into it. I personally would like to say thank you because you did introduce, you called me up and said this might be something for yourself to look at. And I went on the course thanks to your recommendation. And I haven't looked back after it because I think it's a great course. And I think you and Jez are doing a brilliant job. So well done. And thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you.
And thanks for spending the time with us today. And you and your family, please be safe.
Great. Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.